A wealthy single father walked into his son's therapy center, only to find a waitress, not a therapist, kneeling on the floor, holding up a picture card. His son, silent for years, opened his mouth and tried, just tried. The staff said she didn't belong. He was told she was unqualified, but the way his son looked at her like he trusted her made him stop in his tracks. What was she really doing there? And why did it feel like he was the one learning to speak? If you believe that healing sometimes begins in the most unexpected places, stay with us. And if this story stirs something quiet in you, like subscribe or share, you're not alone in feeling it. Rain was falling hard in Forest Grove, Oregon. That kind of steady early spring rain that turned the air soft and blurred the outlines of parked cars and street signs. Maplewood Diner, nestled at the corner of Main and Lincoln, was mostly quiet at this hour past the breakfast rush, not yet the lunch crowd. Booths sat half-filled with regulars reading newspapers, nurses off night shifts, a retired teacher correcting papers in the corner. The bell above the door rang. Heads turned. Ethan Cross walked in with his son. He looked like he didn't belong there, in his pressed navy coat and Italian leather shoes, holding an umbrella that probably cost more than most people's rent. The boy at his side, Lucas, wore a bright yellow rain jacket, the hood pulled tight. His small fingers wrapped around a stuffed bear clutched to his chest like it was his only anchor. Ethan scanned the room, nodded once at the hostess without waiting for acknowledgement, and led Lucas to a booth near the window. He sat down stiffly, adjusting his cufflinks, and reached for his phone. Lucas didn't sit. He stood beside the table, head lowered, swaying gently, silent. At the server station near the coffee machine, Chloe Bennett watched it all happen. 27, slim, and always moving. Chloe had worked at Maplewood since she was 19. She wasn't one to hover, but something about the boy made her pause. It wasn't just the way he avoided eye contact or how close he stayed to his father. It was the way his whole body felt like it was bracing for something. She grabbed 2 menus, took a breath, and approached the table. "Good morning," she said, gentle but not pitying. "Would you like coffee?" "Sir." "And for the little guy, apple juice." Ethan didn't look up. Coffee. And water. Lucas started to tremble. The shift was so subtle at first. Chloe almost missed it. A tiny whimper, followed by the rustle of the bear as Lucas pressed it to his face. Then the sound came. Sharp and raw, a high-pitched cry, followed by a guttural shout as he kicked the side of the booth. Heads turned. Ethan froze. His jaw tightened, his grip on the table firm. "Lucas," he said, low, strained. "Stop." The boy screamed louder. A couple in their 60s, 2 tables over exchanged looks. The retired teacher glanced up, clearly annoyed. Someone muttered, "Spoiled." Chloe didn't move right away. Then, in one smooth motion, she reached into the deep pocket of her apron and pulled out a laminated card, a small blue square with the symbol of a white cloud and the word "Breathe" in bold font. She knelt beside Lucas. Not too close, not touching. She simply held up the card and took a slow, exaggerated breath. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. Lucas stopped crying, just for a second. He stared at her, unsure. She did it again. His breathing slowed. He mimicked her, just a little. Then came the word, a whisper, broken but whole. Breathe. Time didn't stop, but it did thin. The rain tapped gently against the window beside them. The teacher lowered her pen. Someone put down their fork. Chloe lowered the card. She said nothing, just gave the boy the smallest smile, more in her eyes than on her lips. Ethan stood up. "Who told you to interact with my son?" His voice was sharp, controlled, but laced with something colder. Chloe rose, card still in hand. "I didn't teach him anything," she said. "He already knew how." Lucas climbed into the booth. From the front pocket of his coat, he pulled a crumpled notebook and a stubby crayon. His hand moved in quick, confident lines: green, blue, orange. He tore the page out and held it up. The drawing was simple, a stick figure with brown hair holding a square card, and a smaller figure smiling beside her. Above them was a yellow sun with crooked rays. Ethan didn't even glance at it. He reached for his wallet, tossed a folded bill onto the table, and said, "Come on, Lucas." Lucas held on to the drawing. He followed, but slower. Outside, the rain was heavier. Ethan opened the umbrella. Lucas stood beside him, staring back at the window where Chloe stood, watching. She stepped out. No jacket, no umbrella, arms folded, not shivering, not smiling, just watching. Lucas lifted the drawing, pressed it against his chest, and turned away. Inside the diner, no one said anything. Chloe went back to the server station, reached into her apron, and gently wiped the corner of the cloud card. She didn't look back, but he knew something had changed. Rain streaked the glass wall of the Riverstone Tower penthouse, blurring the sharp skyline of downtown Portland into pale lines and smudges of light. Inside, silence sat thick. Lucas curled into the oversized beanbag near the bookshelf, the damp crayon drawing pressed tight to his chest, edges already softening under his fingers. His yellow jacket lay in a puddle near the door. The bear, his constant companion, had been placed carefully beside him, ears up, watching. Ethan moved through the space with quiet precision. He took off his coat, folded it neatly, and laid it across the back of the leather sofa. He loosened his tie, unbuttoned his cuffs, and walked to the liquor cabinet. One pour, no ice. He drank half of it before setting the glass down. Then he stood by the window and watched the rain. Rachel arrived without knocking. She always did that. Older by 4 years, she carried herself with a calm that never needed to be announced. Today, she held a folder of paperwork, staffing plans, community grant proposals for the Cross Foundation. But when she stepped inside and saw Lucas motionless in the corner, her expression changed. What happened? Ethan didn't turn around. He had an episode at the diner. Rachel sat on the armrest, glancing toward Lucas. He's never held onto a drawing like that. It was raining. Maybe he was cold. She waited. Ethan didn't offer more. Rachel leaned over and pulled a blanket from the basket by the couch. She brought it to Lucas, covering his legs with slow, careful hands. He didn't flinch, but he didn't look up either. Was it the staff? Did someone touch him? Ethan finally moved. He walked to the dining table and picked up the drawing Lucas had left behind, still damp, smudged at the corners. He studied it. 2 figures, one tall, one small, a card with a cloud between them, a sun drawn in the corner, and now, something new, a red heart connecting their hands. Rachel approached, peering over his shoulder. "That's not just a memory," she said. "That's a bond." Ethan folded the paper once, then again, and placed it under a book as if to flatten it back into reason. She overstepped. He said. She helped him speak. He looked at her. His voice was steady, but the lines under his eyes gave him away. That wasn't her role. Rachel said nothing. Instead, she picked up her folder, placed it on the counter, and walked over to Lucas. She crouched beside him and reached out with an open hand. Lucas didn't take it, but he slid the drawing toward her, slowly, then pulled it back before she could touch it. His way of saying something without saying it. Rachel looked up at Ethan. You know, maybe she didn't teach him anything new. Maybe she just reminded him he already knew how. Later, while Lucas napped. Ethan sat at his desk, scrolling through reports on dietary routines, communication therapies, and recent updates from the Cross Center's language specialists. Nothing in those files mentioned the use of picture cards outside of clinical settings. Nothing about waitress intervention. Yet the sound of that broken little word "breathe" kept running through his mind like a skipped track. He made a call to Dr. Myers, Lucas's former speech pathologist. "We need to resume sessions," he said. "She hasn't responded to stimuli in months." "Doctor," Myers replied. "We try again." Before hanging up, Ethan asked the question he hadn't asked before. Is it possible a child's first breakthrough can happen with a stranger? There was a pause. "Sometimes," Myers said. "When the stranger doesn't ask for anything in return," that night, after dinner. Lucas shuffled down the hall and slipped the folded drawing under Ethan's office door. Ethan found it later, opening the paper to find one new addition, a small purple shape above the heart. It was a speech bubble. Inside it, Lucas had written, in thick, uneven letters, "Thank you." Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he placed the drawing back under glass, but he didn't know whether he was trying to preserve it or keep it from spreading. He didn't see Lucas watching quietly from the hallway, fingers gripping the edge of the doorframe like he was waiting for permission to speak again. Morning returned to Forest Grove with soft drizzle and the scent of pine carried on the wind. Chloe stepped into Maplewood Diner at 7:01, apron tied, hair pulled back, sneakers still damp from the walk down West 12th. The place looked the same, faded vinyl booths, chipped mugs stacked by the sink, and a jukebox that hadn't worked right since 2009, but something was off. Lena, the hostess, caught her eye and leaned in as Chloe clocked in. "You've got visitors?" she whispered, then added with a half grin. "Or at least your name's been asked about." Chloe frowned. By who? Someone from that big glass tower across the river. Cross Innovations. The words landed with an unexpected thud. Chloe forced a nod and turned away, pretending to adjust the coffee filters. Her fingers trembled slightly. Rumors travel differently in small towns. They don't run. They seep under doors, through checkout lines, inside folded napkins. By mid-morning, even the dishwasher knew that some high-ranking executive had called, asking for the young waitress with the picture cards. It didn't feel like attention. It felt like pressure. At the back booth near the window, Mrs. Violet, one of Chloe's regulars, a sharp-witted woman in her 70s with a faded wedding ring and clear blue eyes, lifted a hand. Chloe brought her the usual half grapefruit, black coffee. "You were kind to that boy yesterday." "Mrs." Violet said. Chloe offered a modest shrug. He just needed a breath. The older woman slid a note across the table, a single sentence written in looping cursive. "You should know he hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years." Chloe folded the note and tucked it into her pocket. Later that day, Cliff, the diner's manager, caught her near the storeroom. His tone was clipped, not cold, just careful. "You got a letter." He handed her a manila envelope with Cross Innovations letterhead. The name at the bottom was McCall Legal Affairs. "They're asking if you'd be open to consulting on a community education project," Cliff said. "Special needs communication strategies." Chloe blinked. "Me," Cliff shrugged. "I guess they think you've got something to offer." She opened the envelope. It wasn't a job offer. It was more like a nudge, no promises, a mention of a preliminary observation session. One sentence stood out: "All compensation will be discussed directly during a preliminary meeting with Mr. Ethan Cross." Her chest tightened. She spent the rest of her shift in a blur, took orders, poured coffee, cleared plates. But her mind kept circling back to that boy's face. The way he clung to that drawing. The way he said breathe. That evening, Chloe walked home through the narrow lanes of her neighborhood, past the old barbershop with papered windows, past a cracked mural of the town's founding year. Her apartment sat above a closed thrift store, the stairs creaking under her weight. Inside, she tossed the apron aside and stood in the dim light of her kitchen, staring at the photo wall she hadn't touched in years. Her brother's face smiled back at her. Evan, 12 years old, wild hair and wide eyes, captured in a moment just before everything fell apart. She remembered the nights she sat beside him, building trust out of picture cards and whispered songs, the way he used to point instead of speak, the day he finally said her name. Helping Lucas hadn't been a moment of brilliance. It had been instinct, muscle memory. She walked to the table, picked up the phone, and dialed the number on the letter. Her thumb hovered over the green call button. Then she read the final line again. "Compensation will be determined in person by Mr. Cross." Her hand lowered. Not yet. Not on those terms. Outside. The rain started again, tapping soft against the window pane like a question still waiting for its answer. Dinner at the penthouse passed in silence. Lucas pushed the carrots around his plate, not eating, not protesting, just absent. Ethan sat across the table, trying to focus on his tablet, but the screen blurred, unread. The untouched food. The bear left at the far corner of the couch. The paper with Chloe's drawing folded perfectly square, all of it gnawed at him. When Lucas finally slid off his chair and padded down the hall, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned toward the kitchen and barked into the intercom, asking why the wrong toy had been sent from the therapy center. His assistant apologized, said she'd fix it. Rachel, who'd stopped by with a folder of cross-foundation grant renewals, watched the entire exchange from the edge of the room. "You're not angry at her," she said quietly. "You're angry because he responded to someone else." Ethan didn't answer. "You can build a company from scratch, but you still can't predict a 6-year-old, she added. He poured himself a drink. "I pay for the best specialists in the region. Maybe what he needed wasn't the best," Rachel said. "Maybe he just needed someone who remembered how it feels to be quiet." The words hit a part of him he hadn't armored. Early the next morning, Ethan drove to Cross Center, parking in the back lot to avoid attention. He hadn't stepped inside for nearly 6 months, not since he'd handed over most of the oversight to the board. Today, though, he took the elevator alone and walked straight to the observation floor. The center was still the soft hum of filtered air, child-sized chairs in tidy rows, shelves lined with sensory tools, and laminated instructions. He entered the surveillance room where therapy sessions were recorded for review. A technician glanced up, startled, and handed him the log sheet. Ethan scanned the footage from the day they'd gone to Maplewood Diner, on screen. Lucas sat alone at a table, hands clenched, lips pursed. No one was nearby. But then, off to the side, Chloe appeared. She wasn't working with Lucas. She was seated across the room, using cards to help another child arrange a sentence. Her voice wasn't audible, but her body language spoke volumes: patience, calm, rhythm, and every few seconds, her eyes flicked toward Lucas, not interfering, just watching, in case. She had been there, even when she wasn't assigned to him. That afternoon, Ethan found himself parked in front of Magnolia and Finch, a bakery tucked behind a bookshop on Hawthorne Boulevard. He stepped inside, ignored the glass case of cherry tarts and lemon loaves, and approached the counter. Chloe stood behind it, in a white apron, dusted with flour, her braid tucked over one shoulder. She didn't seem surprised to see him, but she said nothing. Ethan ordered a small box of pastries, whatever was fresh, and paid in cash. As he turned to leave, Chloe called out, "Wait." She disappeared into the kitchen, then returned with the same box, slipping in something extra before taping it shut. He took it without a word. Back home. Lucas sat near the window, drawing in his notebook. Ethan placed the box on the coffee table and opened it. 4 pastries. On top, a folded piece of lined paper. Chloe's handwriting was tight and even. "I didn't do it for a paycheck. I had a brother like Lucas. I know what it's like when someone can't find the words. You just sit beside them until they do." Lucas peered over the edge of the table, eyes catching on the paper. He reached out and traced a finger over Chloe's name. Then he looked up. "Chloe," he said, quietly. Ethan froze. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect, but it was clear. "Chloe," Lucas said again, pointing to the signature at the bottom of the note. It was the first time he'd named someone outside the family. Ethan sat down slowly. He picked up his phone and typed Chloe Bennett into the search bar. The results loaded quickly, mostly nothing, until one old article popped up from a Salem news archive. Teen granted custody of brother after mother's addiction charges. The photo was grainy, but unmistakable. Chloe at 17, standing in front of a courthouse, holding her brother's hand. She wore the same expression she had yesterday when she held up that cloud card, quiet, steady, unshaken. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the screen still lit in his hand, and for the first time, he wondered not who Chloe was, but what she had already survived to get here. He didn't notice Lucas leaning against him, head resting on his side, hand still holding the edge of the note. The elevator doors opened to the 32nd floor of Cross Innovations, and Ethan stepped out into the bright, angular silence of the executive wing. Pearl District sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, bouncing off steel fixtures and clean surfaces. He barely glanced at the rows of awards mounted on the wall, the plaques bearing his name. Today, he wasn't here for accolades. He entered conference room E without knocking. The door shut behind him with a soft click. Inside, Amanda, his chief of staff, was already seated, laptop open, stylus in hand. On the screen was the latest progress report from the Cross Foundation's community outreach program. Ethan didn't look at it. "I want to reevaluate the education branch," he said flatly, "especially the pilot programs at Cross Center." Amanda blinked. "The preschool therapy wing and the personnel who interact with the children," he added. "Find me the records of Chloe Bennett." She hesitated. "She's not employed with us." "Then find the legal contact. Whoever sent that letter to her. I want a different tone this time. No formalities. No threats of terms and agreements." Amanda's fingers moved quickly. "Do you want legal to draft no?" Ethan said. "This isn't a contract. It's an invitation." Meanwhile, across town, Chloe pushed open the back door of Magnolia and Finch with her elbow, balancing 2 trays of blueberry scones. The kitchen buzzed with clanging pans and the low hum of the dishwasher. A courier in a dark jacket stood at the counter, holding a flat envelope. "For you," he said. She wiped her hands on her apron and accepted the delivery. The return address read Cross Innovations Legal Affairs. Her stomach turned. She opened it at the break table, fingers careful but tight. The letter was short, almost too short. It acknowledged her interaction with Lucas, cited observed moments of impact, and extended an invitation to participate in a one-time informal assessment session at the Cross Center. It ended with a personal contact, Rachel Cross, project coordinator, no contract, no salary, just a name and a number. That night, Chloe sat in her apartment. The letter unfolded beside a cooling cup of mint tea. Her phone rested face down on the table. She turned it over, stared at the number. Then, with a deep breath, dialed. "Rachel Cross." A woman answered, her voice warm, measured. "Hi, this is Chloe Bennett." "I'm glad you called. I got your letter," Chloe said. "But I need to be honest. I'm not a therapist. I don't have a degree." What happened with Lucas, Rachel cut in gently. "I read the article about your brother." Chloe froze. "I also heard Lucas say your name," Rachel continued. "It was the first time he said anyone's name outside his father and me." Chloe's voice caught. "I didn't mean to interfere." "You didn't," Rachel said. "You reached him." A quiet beat passed. Chloe softened. "So, this isn't a formality." "No," Rachel said. "It's a chance. For him. For you. For everyone watching from the sidelines, afraid to trust someone without credentials, but with instinct." Chloe ran a finger along the edge of the letter. "I don't want anything out of this. Just to be helpful. That's why we reached out." Rachel said, "No one's forcing anything. The session is yours to walk into or away from." They said goodbye. No pressure, no promises. Later that evening, Chloe received a follow-up email from Rachel Time. Location. Simple instructions. At the bottom, a final note. One observer will be present, Ethan Cross, not as CEO, as a parent. Chloe read the line twice. The next morning, as she stood at the bus stop near West 12th Street, the letter folded inside her coat pocket. Her fingers traced the embossed logo. Her thoughts split between the child who spoke her name and the man whose silence still lingered like a shadow across the diner floor. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she knew she couldn't ignore it. The sky over Portland was soft and clear that morning, a rare break in a long week of rain. Sunlight filtered gently through the trees in Gabriel Park, casting a shimmer on the windows of the Cross Center. Chloe stood outside for a moment before entering, letting her breath settle. She had dressed simply clean jeans, a navy sweater, and a thin bracelet she hadn't worn in years, a gift from her brother when he was learning how to make knots. Inside, the center buzzed with quiet purpose. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and Play-Doh. She was led through a small hallway into a spacious activity room filled with natural light, sensory mats, low shelves of toys, and a soft hum of voices. The staff were attentive but gave her space, They didn't hover. That had been Rachel's instruction. Lucas sat in the far corner near the window, cross-legged on a rug. His bear was beside him, ears slightly frayed. Before him, a set of laminated picture cards were spread out in neat rows. He didn't look up. Chloe took a breath, walked over slowly, and knelt across from him not too close. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a blank card and a pen. With quiet, deliberate motion, she drew a curved line, a smile. Then she flipped the card and slid it gently forward. The word hello was printed in bold block letters. Lucas looked at it, then at her. His lips parted. Hi. The word wasn't perfect, but it came, clearer than before. His voice held weight. Across the room, the play therapist froze mid-reach. A soft clatter of toys behind her went unnoticed. Even the administrative staff peeking in from the hallway went still. And Ethan, seated quietly near the observation window, stood up. He didn't speak. He took one step forward, folder in hand. Something slipped loose from between the pages. A single sheet of paper floated to the ground. Rachel, standing near the door, bent to retrieve it before anyone else could. Her eyes landed on the drawing. A child's hand had traced the outlines of a house, windows too large, a sun with 12 rays, and a tree next to it. 2 stick figures stood under the roof, one small, one tall. The taller one had long hair drawn in spirals. Under the roof, written in blocky, trembling letters. Mom Rachel looked up at Ethan, her voice low. He's asking, not about biology, about belonging. Ethan's jaw tensed. He stared at the drawing like it was a verdict he hadn't prepared for. Lucas, unaware of the stir, gently reached across and touched Chloe's sleeve. Then he grasped her wrists softly, but deliberately. Chloe didn't pull back. She just smiled, then tapped the hello card once more. The moment was small, but it split something open, not just in Lucas, not just in Chloe, in Ethan. A quiet unraveling in the chest, the kind that made pride taste like regret. He watched his son not only speak, but choose, and not choose him. Chloe began packing her things quietly. She gave Lucas a gentle wave and nodded to the therapist. No words, no ceremony. As she stepped toward the door, she passed Ethan without making eye contact. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table beside him, knuckles paling. He wanted to speak, to stop her, to explain. But no words came. Behind her, the door closed with a soft click. He remained still, watching her silhouette through the frosted glass. Something inside him moved slowly, like a tide retreating, leaving behind what could no longer be denied. He didn't follow. Not yet. But he knew the next words he spoke might change everything. The night was long and still above downtown Portland. Through the glass walls of his office on the 42nd floor, Ethan could see the city dim beneath the hush of evening traffic. Headlights flickered like distant signals, and the Willamette River reflected a fractured trail of streetlights. He sat at his desk, not working, just sitting. He'd stayed late on purpose. Rachel knew that, so when she knocked once and stepped inside, she didn't say much. She held a small USB drive in her palm. "I think you need to hear this," she said. Not accusatory, not soft, either, just factual. Ethan didn't reach for it, just looked at her. "What is it?" "Something you didn't ask for, but you should have." She placed it on the desk and walked out, leaving the door ajar. He waited a long moment before moving. Then slowly, deliberately, he plugged the USB into his laptop. The folder inside held a single audio file, labeled by date and nothing else. He clicked play. The recording started with the slight buzz of a line connecting, then Rachel's voice, calm and neutral, introducing herself as a project coordinator looking into community education partners. She'd called Magnolia and Finch under a different name, a pretext. Then Chloe's voice came through. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. Her tone wasn't defensive, just clear. "I'm not trying to get a job or attention or whatever your company thinks I want. I saw a kid struggling, and I remembered my brother." There was a pause. I know what it's like when the adults in the room are too busy planning to notice what a child's trying to say without words. I've been the one sitting next to a kid who screams because that's the only sound he's got. I don't need a paycheck to care. The call ended quietly, without formality. No ask, no demand. Ethan leaned back. The office was silent around him. The city below kept moving, but he wasn't part of it right now. He closed the laptop and stared at the wall, not really seeing it, all this time. He had built walls to keep opportunists out to protect Lucas, to protect himself, but in doing so, he'd stopped seeing the ones who came with no agenda. He thought back to Chloe in the diner, the way she didn't flinch when Lucas screamed, the way she had quietly knelt beside him. No judgment, no fanfare. And again in the therapy room, how Lucas had reached for her like gravity had shifted. For the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't know what to do, but he knew what not to do. He reached for his phone and called McCall from legal, and all pending communications with Chloe Bennett. He said, "Sir, there's an open file, close it." Ethan interrupted. "Permanently. No contact from the firm. No pressure. I was wrong." There was silence on the other end. Then a quiet, "Understood." After the call, Ethan opened the top drawer of his desk. Inside lay the drawing Lucas had made, the one with the house, the smiling woman, and the word written under the roof like a question, "Mom." He looked at it for a long while, then carefully folded it into a neat square. From his pen tray, he pulled a plain envelope, slid the paper inside, and sealed it. On the front, he wrote in slow, deliberate strokes, "If you're willing, we'd like you to come back." He didn't sign it. He didn't have to. He set the envelope down beside his phone and turned once more to the window. The city hadn't changed, but something in him had begun to move, quietly, like the shift of wind before the rain returns. The chandeliers of Grandwood Hall shimmered with polished restraint, casting a gold hue over the evening gowns and tailored suits that moved through the reception floor. It was Cross Foundation's annual fundraiser, a gathering where prestige was expected, and emotion was politely boxed behind formal speeches and endowment numbers. Ethan adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror before stepping into the main hall. The evening had been rehearsed to the minute. Donors would mingle, Rachel would greet the guests. Ethan, as figurehead and benefactor, would deliver his keynote. And Lucas, his silent shadow, would stand beside him, present but unobtrusive. Lucas wore a navy blazer, the sleeves slightly long. He held his stuffed fox under one arm, something no one had dared ask him to leave behind. His hair was combed neatly, but his eyes wandered, unsure. Ethan gently rested a hand on his shoulder. "Just stay near me." "Okay." The room buzzed with soft conversation and champagne flutes. Chloe, dressed in a white shirt and server's apron, moved among the guests with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. She hadn't expected the crowd to make her this nervous, but it did. Her name badge read Volunteer Support Staff, a title Rachel had arranged quietly, under no fanfare. When Ethan took the stage, the room dimmed slightly, and applause followed by reflex. He started to speak about the Foundation's mission, about equity in education, about giving children a voice. But mid-sentence, something changed. Lucas tugged away from Ethan's side. People turned. Murmurs started. He walked down the steps slowly, but with intent toward the opposite side of the room, toward Chloe. She had just turned with her tray when she saw him. Her hand stopped mid-air. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a laminated card, held it up with both hands, a picture of two hands clasped. Underneath, "Thank you." Chloe dropped to her knees, eye level, smiled and whispered gently, "You're welcome." Silence. Then someone gasped, then applause not scattered, not awkward, but swelling from the edges inward. Not for Ethan, not for the Foundation, but for the boy who had once screamed in silence and now chose his moment, and chose her. Ethan stood frozen on stage. The microphone caught nothing but the sound of clapping. His voice had fallen away somewhere in the middle of his sentence. Chloe remained kneeling, her hand still resting on Lucas's. She looked up just briefly, and met Ethan's eyes across the room. Rachel, from near the tech booth, didn't clap. She watched her brother's face instead, waiting to see whether it would harden or soften. Ethan stepped off stage, instinct kicking in, but not fast enough. By then, a journalist from the Oregon Herald had already lifted their phone. The moment was snapped, posted, and within 20 minutes would make its way across the platform X with the headline, "The Silent Son Speaks, but Not to His Father." Backstage, Lucas walked back on his own and sat on a bench near the loading dock. Chloe was gone, just disappeared into the service hallway without a word, like she'd never been there. In the dressing lounge, Rachel showed Ethan the article, already gathering traction. He didn't say anything at first. "Then they're twisting it." "No," Rachel said gently. "They're reflecting it." He sank into the chair behind the vanity mirror, palms pressed against his knees. Lucas had spoken again, not with prompting, not with therapy, but with gratitude, and not to him. Rachel turned to leave. "You can't just show up at the top of a staircase and call it parenting. Ethan, you have to climb down." Ethan looked up at the glass of water on the table, then past it, then somewhere deeper. He didn't respond. Not yet, but something had shifted in the stillness that followed. The morning air inside Cross Innovations was unusually tense, the kind that clung to every surface carpet, glass, skin. It wasn't just another business day. The headlines had shifted overnight, and now they carried his name. Ethan stood just beyond the glass doors of the executive wing, holding a folded newspaper in his hand, the photo almost mocking. Lucas, his son, was in the center of the frame, holding a flashcard that read, "Thank you," while Chloe knelt beside him, smiling. Above it, the headline, "The Silent Son Speaks, but Not to His Father." In the boardroom, the usual filtered coffee and ambient jazz couldn't ease the eyes darting to Ethan. The communications director, Karen, began briskly. "We need a response today. The public loves this narrative too much for it to die quietly." Ethan didn't sit. He stared at the image again. His name had always been attached to campaigns, patents, numbers, never to his own child's unmet gaze. Karen continued, "We can frame it around our ongoing work with specialists. Highlight how everything has been carefully planned, including the community partnerships. We position Chloe as a temporary educational aid, clean, professional." But Rachel, who had been quiet until then, leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice lower but stronger. "Or," she said, "you could tell them the truth. That for all your planning, it was your son who made the first real choice. And he didn't choose you." The silence that followed wasn't sharp. It was soft, heavy. Ethan didn't respond, didn't blink. He just folded the paper again, creased it with a thumb, and walked out without a word. That afternoon, he picked Lucas up early from Cross Center. The boy had a sticker on his sweater and grass stains on his knees. He climbed into the back seat and held up a flashcard of his own, making a scribbled crayon drawing of two stick figures holding hands. "Together," Lucas said, his voice a near whisper. Ethan pulled over into Washington Park without thinking, near the same trail they used to walk with Helena, Lucas's mother. It had been years. The car doors clicked shut. Father and son walked side by side, and Ethan let Lucas move ahead. Just a little, not enough to lose him, but enough for the boy to feel the space. On a wooden bench near the duck pond, they sat. Ethan watched his son toss a cracker into the water, watched the ripples move outward like thoughts he couldn't name. He checked his phone and saw a message from Rachel. It was a scanned document, Chloe's signed volunteer agreement. 6 months. No compensation. A note at the bottom in her writing. "If Lucas needs me, I'll be there. That's enough." He didn't know what to feel. He wanted to trust her, but trust wasn't something that came clean for him. Not after everything with Helena. Not after years of masking doubt with discipline. Lucas shifted beside him and asked, "Dad, Chloe home?" Ethan looked at his son's eyes wide, waiting. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The sun had begun to lower, casting long, golden lines across the pond. He glanced westward, toward the edge of town, where the lights of Magnolia and Finch would be flickering on just about now. It wasn't a question of logistics anymore. It was a question of worth, of whether he could make space for someone who hadn't asked for it, but gave it anyway. He didn't answer, just sat there, watching the ducks glide across the water like they'd been doing long before he knew what fatherhood required, and long after he admitted how much of it he had left to learn. She didn't look back. But he knew something had changed. The streets of downtown Portland were slick from an early autumn drizzle. Magnolia and Finch was almost closed, the interior dim except for a few overhead bulbs casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Inside, Chloe moved from table to table, wiping slowly, as if she was delaying the end of her shift for no reason other than habit. Her ponytail had come a little loose. Her apron was flecked with powdered sugar and something pink from a raspberry glaze. Outside, standing just beyond the glass, Ethan hesitated. No briefcase, no suit, no entourage. Just a quiet man in rolled-up sleeves, his hands buried in his coat pockets, and a tightness around his jaw that hadn't been there when they first met. When Chloe finally looked up and saw him, she didn't move right away. Her expression didn't shift. She just held his gaze through the glass as if measuring what he had come to say. He pushed the door open. The bell jingled with a soft, lonely sound. "I didn't call ahead," he said, voice low. "Didn't want this to be arranged." Chloe folded the cleaning cloth in her hands. "I'm still on the clock. I won't take long." She nodded toward the last table by the window. He followed her there in silence, the soles of his shoes sticking lightly to the damp floor with each step. They sat across from each other. No menus, no formalities. Ethan rested his forearms on the table. The sleeve of his shirt rode up slightly. Chloe noticed the scar small, pale, old enough that time had tried to erase it. She said nothing. "I don't know how to apologize the right way," Ethan began. "I've built a life where I usually don't have to." She didn't laugh, but her mouth twitched, like the shadow of one. "That sounds about right. I came here tonight to ask you to talk, not as a CEO, not as a father, just someone who's finally ready to shut up and listen." Chloe leaned back in her chair. The weariness on her face didn't harden. If anything, it softened just a little. "I was 17 when I signed custody papers for my brother," she said. "No guardian, no second signature. I forged one just to keep him with me. We were in Oregon City, in a one-bedroom apartment above a garage. He couldn't talk then, couldn't even say my name, just pointed, but I stayed, every night. Even when I worked 3 jobs and barely remembered how old I was." She paused, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her untouched mug. "People told me he'd never live on his own, that he'd always be dependent. But last month, he got hired as a teaching assistant at a school in Salem. Special ed. He teaches kids just like him." Her voice didn't tremble. It grounded itself in something old, something earned. All it took was someone who didn't leave. Ethan didn't respond right away. His eyes stayed on her, but his mind was somewhere between the corners of this cafe and the nights he'd paced hospital rooms with Lucas, terrified of not being enough, of being too much. "I thought I was doing everything right," he finally said. "Therapists, private sessions, custom programs. But I never really gave him a chance to reach for anyone else. I was afraid. If he connected with someone else, I'd lose what little I had left of him." "You didn't lose him," Chloe said gently. "He found someone who speaks his language." He blinked, like something in him shifted slightly off axis. "I want you to come back," he said. "Not as a consultant, not under my name. I need someone who knows what it feels like to be on the edge of everything. Someone who's stuck through the kind of nights I've only seen from the other side." Chloe looked down at the scar on his wrist, then back at his face. "You think that's what this is? An even trade, pain for pain?" "No," Ethan said. "I think it's a chance. And maybe I'm the one who has something to learn now." She didn't answer. Not yet. The bakery had emptied. Outside, the street was quiet. The rain had stopped. but the pavement still held its glimmer. Chloe stood, walked to the front, and turned the sign to closed. She didn't lock the door. She returned, took her seat again. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. The morning air outside Cross Center was crisp, the sky a dull silver. Chloe walked through the side gate with her bag over one shoulder, wearing the same gray coat she'd worn since winter started, though the fabric had begun to thin at the elbows. She didn't pause at the front desk this time. The receptionist nodded. She was expected now, not as a guest, as staff. A new laminated badge hung from her lanyard community advisor. No title ever felt less like a costume. Inside the therapy room, Lucas spotted her first. His body stiffened, then unlocked like a spring. He didn't speak, just ran over and reached into the pocket of his hoodie. From it, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to her with both hands. Chloe opened it carefully, crayon strokes rough. Uneven formed a kitchen scene. A stove, a bowl, and three people with big smiles. One wore glasses. One had curly hair. One had a speech bubble. Inside it, a single word, hey. Chloe knelt. Is this us? Lucas nodded hard, then pointed to the woman with curly hair. You, he whispered, across the room. Ethan leaned against the glass wall, watching silently. No suit today, just a navy pullover and jeans. Rachel was beside him, arms crossed. For a second, none of them spoke. Then the door opened, and in walked a woman in a tailored pantsuit and a perfume trail that didn't belong in a place with children. Beryl Hartley, director of programming at Cross Foundation. Her heels clicked against the tile like punctuation marks. I see our new advisor is already assuming quite the informal approach, Hartley said flatly. She didn't look at Chloe, just past her. I hope this emotional rapport doesn't substitute for technical methodology. Chloe stood, meeting her gaze. I'm here to support Lucas. If that's a problem, I can leave. Hartley offered a tight smile. We appreciate the help, but let's be clear, without credentials in speech-language pathology or behavioral therapy, you're not authorized to lead interventions. Observation and logistics only. Ethan cleared his throat but didn't interrupt. Not yet. That afternoon, in the boardroom upstairs, Chloe was called in. A semicircle of chairs waited Hartley, two board advisors, and Ethan. Rachel stood in the corner, not seated. Hartley began, tone clipped. We're initiating a review of your participation in direct child support activities. It's standard. I understand, Chloe replied. You may continue your involvement, pending observation by a certified therapist during sessions. If any deviation from our protocol occurs, Ethan raised a hand. Let's try something different. His voice was calm, but sharp around the edges. We set up a practical demonstration. Chloe conducts a language building session. Lucas participates, along with two other children. Independent observers assess. If her methods prove effective, we adapt, not debate. A silence fell. Hartley blinked. You'd stake Cross's reputation on an unlicensed volunteer. I'd stake it on results, Ethan said, without flinching. Chloe looked at him, uncertain, but he didn't meet her eyes. He just turned to Rachel. Schedule it. End of the week. Chloe nodded. If I fail, I walk. No one's asking you to prove your worth, Rachel said softly. Only your work. Outside the building later. Chloe waited at the curb for the bus. It was late. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting a low pink glow across the city skyline. Ethan stepped out, coat slung over one arm. You don't have to do this, he said. I know, she answered, but I want to. Then, elsewhere in the city, in a much quieter office with frosted glass and no children's drawings on the walls, Hartley sat with her assistant. On her desk, a printed memo, stamped confidential. She tapped a red pen against her nail. Send a request to legal. I want a review of reputational risk. Specifically, what exposure we have if Ms. Bennett continues participating in public-facing events. Under what grounds, the assistant asked. Hartley's smile didn't reach her eyes. Instability, emotional proximity, and optics. Always the optics. Outside, a light rain began to fall. At the cross center's quiet window, Chloe and Lucas stood, their fingers touching the same cold pane of glass, unaware of what was already being set in motion. He didn't speak this time, but he didn't let go either. The hearing chamber inside Portland's old city hall smelled of pine polish and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The city used the space for grant disputes, minor civic hearings, and, when necessary, for foundation board sessions too big to fit behind closed doors. Today, it was Cross Foundation's internal review, and Chloe stood at the center of it. She hadn't been given much notice. Rachel had sent her a text the night before. "You'll be called to speak. Just tell the truth. Nothing more. No explanation. No prep." Chloe wore the only formal thing she owned, a navy dress with sleeves slightly too long. She arrived 5 minutes early, waited in the hallway until a staff member waved her in. The room was already half full. Suits, laptops, glasses perched low on noses, a judge's bench in front, though today it wasn't a judge, just a foundation chair with a gavel and a mild cough. She stepped in, and the low hum of conversation fell off a cliff. People turned, some leaned, others squinted, trying to match the woman in the press photo, the one with the child at the fundraiser, to the one standing here now. Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't smile either, just walked slowly to her seat. Ethan was already in the gallery, off to the side. No suit, just a black sweater and charcoal slacks. Lucas sat in his lap, small shoes dangling. Ethan met her gaze, gave nothing away, neither nod nor signal. Then Beryl Hartley stood, her voice, smooth and clipped, carried without raising. "We appreciate the opportunity to clarify roles and protect procedural integrity," she began. Cross Foundation holds a duty to follow federal guidelines regarding therapeutic interventions. Individuals without verified credentials, regardless of personal rapport, cannot engage in direct instructional or emotional guidance for minors with medical or developmental concerns. She clicked to a slide behind her, a citation from IDEA regulations. Another slide followed, a photo of Chloe handing a flashcard to Lucas. "However well-meaning," Hartley said, "this overstep places our program in a difficult position." She sat, folded her papers, folded her hands. Rachel stood. Her voice was quieter, but she didn't need volume. Her words had weight. The volunteer in question was never hired, never given clinical authority. Her title, community liaison and parent advisor, was created to support family integration, not to replace therapists. This was cleared through internal policy last quarter. She held up a thin document. "This is our own signed exemption. Ms. Bennett's activities fall within it." The room stayed silent. A man on the board adjusted his glasses. The chair nodded, then looked toward Chloe. "You may speak, Ms. Bennett." Chloe rose slowly. She didn't bring a speech, just a file folder held tight in both hands. Her steps were steady as she approached the small podium at the center. She didn't look at Hartley. She looked at Lucas. Then she turned, opened the folder, and laid it flat on the table. Dozens of drawings, simple and crude, slid across the surface. One by one, she lined them up by date. A son with no face, a boy with no mouth. Then another, with small changes, a curved lip, an open hand, a line of letters scribbled above. "They're all from Lucas," she said. "Each week, he made one during our time together. He didn't use words, but he used these." She straightened, eyes on the council now. "I don't have degrees. I don't know the latest curriculum, but I know what it means to be silent. I've lived it. I know what it costs a child when no one waits long enough to hear the sound they do have." She paused, then reached for the final sheet, Lucas's most recent. It showed 3 figures around a table. A speech bubble hovered above the middle one. Inside, "Thank you. I didn't teach him that," Chloe said. "He gave it to me." The room held still. No fidgeting, no typing. Just breath and wood and paper, and the faint scratch of someone's pen being slowly clicked shut. Then, from the back of the chamber, small and sudden, came a voice. "Don't take her." Heads turned. It was Lucas, still sitting on Ethan's lap. His voice was thin, uncertain, but real, and loud enough. Rachel's breath caught. Ethan sat frozen, eyes wide. Lucas looked straight ahead. Please. No one moved. The chair lifted his gavel, paused, then struck it lightly. This board will enter recess. We will re-examine all documentation and resume with a decision at a later time. Chloe returned to her seat. No applause, just silence. Then Rachel leaned in and whispered, without looking away from the table, "This is just the beginning." The air over Mount Tabor that night was cold and dry, the kind that made every breath feel like it carried something unspoken. Ethan pulled his car to a quiet stop outside Rachel's house, headlights briefly cutting across the low stone wall and the dried lavender she kept near the porch. He stepped out slowly, carrying a black leather folder under his arm. Not a briefcase, not a gesture of strategy, just something he couldn't trust anyone else to carry. Rachel opened the door before he knocked. She had seen the headlights from her window. "You're late," she said softly. "I know." They didn't say anything else until they were seated at her kitchen table, the same one where Lucas had spilled juice months ago, and Chloe had laughed like she didn't know how rare that sound was. Ethan placed the folder between them and opened it. Inside was a letter on cross-foundation letterhead, but not reviewed by legal. It was written by hand, then typed. A personal statement. "I signed it this morning," he said, "but I didn't want to submit it until I showed you." Rachel read silently. Her finger paused at the paragraph where Ethan admitted that 2 years ago, when Lucas was first flagged for developmental delays, he'd received a proposal for a specialized early intervention fund. Beryl Hartley had dismissed the recommendation outright. Ethan, in the middle of a corporate merger, had accepted her judgment without question. He had told no one. Until now, "I denied funding for my own son." The letter read, "Because it was easier to believe he'd be fine than to believe the system could be wrong. I hurt him. And I let someone else do it too." Rachel looked up. "You're sure about this?" she asked. Ethan didn't blink. "She's fighting out there with nothing but her voice, and a child who barely found his... I can't keep hiding behind press releases and boardroom titles. That's not parenting. That's cowardice." Rachel closed the folder. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Across town, Chloe came home to her apartment's second floor, narrow hallway, kitchen lights still flickering after 3 calls to maintenance. She found a manila envelope slipped under her door. No name on the outside, no stamp. She opened it slowly. Inside was a photocopy of an internal funding directive from Cross Foundation, dated April 2017. The language was precise authorization to award community-based educational stipends to individuals without formal certification, based on demonstrated field impact. It had never been enacted. Alongside it, a small slip of paper, hand-cut and handwritten in blocky pen. "I was one of the first denied. Keep going. You're changing what we were too afraid to touch." Chloe sat down on the worn-out couch, holding the paper like it might disappear. She read the note again, then again. She didn't know who sent it. Maybe it didn't matter. At that same hour, Ethan pulled into a private driveway in northwest Portland. The house was trimmed, tasteful. A row of yellow tulips bordered the walkway. Hartley's front porch light was still on. She opened the door with a guarded expression. Her blouse was pressed, but her eyes looked like she hadn't slept. "I assume you're here to negotiate," she said. "No," Ethan replied. "I'm here to warn you." He handed her a copy of the scholarship directive, then the statement he'd signed. "This has been buried since 2017. You ignored it. Lucas could have had help earlier. So could dozens of other kids." Hartley read the header, then flipped to the date. Her face stayed still, but her fingers tensed at the corners of the page. "I'm going public," Ethan said, "but I'm offering you the chance to step down with your own statement. Quietly, your choice." She said nothing, just stared at the paper. As he turned to leave, Ethan paused at the edge of the porch. This isn't about a title anymore. It's about who still thinks their silence is protecting something worth saving. He walked back to his car. No more words. Back at home. Lucas sat at the kitchen table with a crayon in each hand. He was drawing something slowly, pausing after each line. Ethan walked over, crouched beside him. On the page were three figures, a taller one, a woman with curls, and a child in the middle. For the first time, Lucas had added words, one under each figure. Dad, Chloe, us. Ethan didn't say a thing, but his hand came to rest on the edge of the paper, just enough to stop it from sliding away. The lobby of Cross Foundation had never been this quiet. On a Monday morning, with its tall glass walls catching the gray light of Portland skies, it usually hummed with meetings and phones and the sound of steps pacing decisions. But today, all of it was still. Chairs had been arranged in rows, a single microphone stood in front of the donor wall, the names etched behind it, catching the morning haze. No press, no headlines, just employees, partners, volunteers, some seated with arms crossed, others standing at the back like they hadn't decided yet whether this was something they wanted to witness or forget. Rachel stood to the side, clipboard in hand. Her eyes followed every person entering the room. She had been the one to call this meeting, but she hadn't scripted it. Ethan stood alone at the front. No slides, no legal team, just a printed statement folded twice in his hand. He didn't smooth it out. "I'm not going to read this," he said. His voice was calm, but the grip on the page was tight enough to crinkle the edges. He looked across the room, somewhere in the third row. Chloe stood quietly beside Lucas, who had his hands in his pockets and his head slightly tilted. He didn't fidget, just watched. Ethan spoke again, softer. There was a moment 2 months ago. Maplewood Diner. Lucas had just said a word. A full word. First time he'd said anything outside of therapy. And he paused, drawing in a breath. I told him to be quiet. I was trying to protect him. Or maybe I was trying to protect myself from what it meant to believe in him and still fail. No one moved. A cough from the far corner broke the silence and disappeared just as quickly. Ethan looked at Chloe. I didn't listen. To my son, or to the people who saw him clearer than I did. I'm sorry. He didn't ask her forgiveness. He didn't look for it either. Chloe didn't reply, just placed her hand on Lucas's shoulder. She stayed close, but didn't touch Ethan, didn't step forward. Lucas turned his head toward her. She leaned down and whispered something. He nodded. A moment passed. Then, without prompting, a woman in the back row stood. Slim, older, blazer worn but clean. She held up a printed letter, voice unshaking. In 2019, I applied for a grant under the Community Intervention Pilot. I was told my experience as a mother wasn't sufficient, even though my methods had helped 4 nonverbal children speak. She lifted the letter higher. This is the response I received. Handwritten note at the bottom. Not qualified, despite intentions. Signed B. Hartley. Several heads turned. Beryl Hartley sat at the end of the first row, spine straight, lips pressed thin. She didn't speak. Rachel stepped forward and gently took the mic from Ethan. We've reviewed 27 cases, she said evenly. Denied not for lack of impact, but for not fitting a frame that kept many out. A long pause. Then Rachel continued. This morning, the board voted to accept a transition plan for Mrs. Hartley. She'll retire with full honors, effective in 30 days. Beryl stood. May I speak? Rachel turned to her. There was no malice in her expression, just a kind of quiet finality. I think this room has already spoken, Rachel said, then handed the mic back to Ethan. Lucas tugged at Chloe's sleeve. He wanted to leave. She nodded. They began walking slowly toward the side door. Ethan watched them go. He didn't follow. Instead, he looked back out at the room. There were no cheers, no applause, but there was clarity. And sometimes, that's the sound justice makes. The campus of Reed College glistened under the filtered Oregon sunlight, the old brick building softened by moss and May breeze. Inside the wood lecture hall, the energy was quieter than expected for a state education summit. Professionals filled the seats, therapists, administrators, nonprofit leads all accustomed to white papers and slide decks, not Stories. The program listed their panel, modestly Rebuilding Trust, a family-centered model of inclusion. No dramatic title, just names Ethan Cross and Chloe Marin. Ethan waited off stage, adjusting his tie without thinking. Chloe stood beside him, holding a cloth pouch. Inside were the laminated cards Lucas had once clung to, symbols of water, food, play, breathe. Her fingers brushed over them like someone checking the edge of a scar. "You don't have to speak like them," Ethan said quietly. "You only have to be you." Chloe nodded once, steady. When Rachel introduced her, the applause was polite, reserved. Chloe stepped into the light with no notes, no presentation, just her hands and her voice. "My name is Chloe," she began. "And I'm not here to speak as a therapist. I'm not licensed. I never finished college. What I have is this." She held up a card, blue background, white waves, water. "My first day with Lucas. He handed me this. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me and waited. That was his way of asking." She went on, told them about the diner, the tears, the flashcards, the man who didn't know how to father a child who didn't speak, and the woman who didn't know how to ask for a future she thought she wasn't allowed to have. But the story never turned sentimental. Her voice held the shape of the fight it took to speak plainly. In a world full of people telling you what you're not certified to do, sometimes the only proof you have is what a child shows you. When she finished, she didn't look at Ethan. She looked at Lucas, sitting in the front row beside Rachel. He'd been swinging his feet quietly the whole time. Now, he stood. A small movement, two hands holding up a drawing, crayon lines, a messy sun, a taller figure holding a smaller one's hand, the word Dad written in uneven blue. The room went completely still. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stood, walked down the steps, and picked his son up, held him, forehead pressed to hair, the way he used to when Lucas was just a baby and the world still felt possible. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The audience stood slowly, not in shock, not in ceremony, but as if something old had loosened in them, a kind of silent ovation that didn't need clapping to land. One therapist wiped her eyes. Another turned to the person beside her and whispered, "I was wrong." After a breath, Ethan returned to the mic. "We built Cross Foundation to change systems, but systems don't raise children. People do. And sometimes the best teachers come without a degree, but with something harder to earn, faith." He let the room sit with that. "Starting this fall, we're launching the Chloe Initiative, a program to train and certify caregivers, advocates, and parents with lived experience. Chloe has agreed to join as the first member of our advisory board." That was the only time Chloe looked surprised. A small inhale. She didn't nod. She didn't smile, but her hand reached back for Lucas's, and he gave it to her easily. When the event ended, people lingered, not around the speakers, but around each other. Some asked quiet questions. Some just needed to stand still in the hallway, as if their own stories had shifted shape. Outside, the light had turned gold over the quad. Lucas tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "We go home now." Ethan looked at him, then at Chloe. She gave the smallest nod. "All of us," the boy asked, a little softer, and for once, Ethan didn't answer right away. He just looked toward the path ahead, wide open beneath the trees. The garden behind Cross Center had always been quiet, but that morning, it felt gentler than usual. Spring had softened the air. Magnolia blossoms drooped low over folding chairs arranged in a loose half circle. The scent of fresh grass and warm pastries drifted together. No stage, no microphones, just people, real ones, scattered in small clusters. Parents holding hands, children tracing fingers over cupcakes, volunteers straightening flower vases they didn't arrange. And in the middle, under the wide shade of a blooming magnolia, Ethan and Chloe stood, side by side. Lucas, in a light blue button-up and khakis that barely stayed tucked, held a small ring box in both hands, like it might float away if he loosened his grip. Rachel didn't clear her throat, didn't unfold any long speech. She just looked at them and said, "Today isn't a beginning. It's a continuation of something that never followed the rules and never needed to." No one clapped. They didn't need to. Ethan turned slightly toward Chloe. He didn't speak in a voice meant for crowds, just for her. "You ready?" he asked. Lucas stepped between them, opened the box, pulled out the simple gold ring, and then, without warning, without prompt, he whispered the word that turned the air electric. "Mom." It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it didn't need to be. Chloe didn't cry. She didn't even blink fast. She just looked at him like you look at someone you've walked through fire with, then knelt, so their eyes met. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered back. Ethan slid the ring on her finger. The world didn't cheer, but something settled, as if a question long asked had finally found its answer not in triumph, but in the quiet certainty of presence. The rest of the morning moved like a slow stream. Someone turned on a portable speaker that played old jazz. Kids wandered with juice boxes. Rachel chatted with a mother whose son used to scream in every public place, but now sat humming to himself under a tree. Chloe didn't make any announcements. She didn't hand out business cards. She helped slice cake, picked up a toy someone left behind, smoothed a girl's dress when it caught on a twig. No title, no platform. Just a woman who chose to stay. She wasn't a teacher. She wasn't a keynote speaker. She wasn't a symbol. She was just Chloe. And that, today, was enough. Later, as the crowd began to thin and folding chairs leaned awkwardly in clumps, Ethan poured 2 paper cups of coffee from a silver thermos. He handed one to her without ceremony, just like that first day at Maplewood Diner. "We still have a lot to learn," he said. Chloe took a sip, warm and bitter, and a lot. She replied, "We don't need to say out loud." They didn't kiss. There was no applause, just Lucas, tugging gently on her sleeve, then skipping ahead on the gravel path toward the edge of the garden. Chloe stood up, smoothed her skirt, slid the cup into a trash bin. She said nothing more. She just walked forward, quiet and certain. And her head was high, like someone who had already arrived. The chairs had been folded. The garden was nearly empty. But one paper cup, still warm, sat on the stone ledge next to a child's drawing that simply said, "Us." No speeches left, no applause, just the quiet weight of something real, something earned. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't saying sorry, it's staying long enough to become someone worth forgiving. And maybe, just maybe, that's what they'd both chosen. Not perfection, not erasure, just presence. A kind that doesn't leave.